We were made for community. 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 Recently, I was at a cookout for a college soccer team that involved a couple girls that I coached years ago. And they were in Southern California playing, and their parents put on this barbecue. And so I went and met some of the neighbors and the coaches on the team, and mainly was there to be an encouragement to the players that I'd coached years ago. And after the barbecue was done, I decided to hang out and help with cleanup, because there was a lot to clean up. And of course, the kids had to go back on their vans, and a lot of the adults left, and there were probably maybe 8 of us left that were cleaning up. And I was standing at a table where there'd been a lot of food, a lot for the preparation and stuff. And across from me was a guy about 45 years old. And so I was picking up something to clean up, and he was picking up something to clean up. And right then, a young lady came up behind him and said, what do you think I should do with this? And it was a bowl. And he said, without thinking, he said, I think you need to ask, and he mentioned the hostess' name. And I thought, wow, what did I just witness? A husband who deferred to his wife, or to some woman, it wasn't his wife, but to some woman, about what she thought ought to happen. That was sort of like, wow. And so I had this big smile on my face, and I said, wow. And he looked at me and I said, you are a veteran husband. And I put my hand out and shook his hand. And it was just kind of that knowing thing of, how many years does it take to learn to do something so simple like that? And so we were having this good moment. And I said, how long have you been married? And he said, 25 years. And I said, I congratulate you. I said, and at that moment, his wife walked up. She heard the very tail of this conversation. And he was reaching for a large bowl to put things in. And she said to him, don't you think you should dry that out first? And without missing a beat, he fumbled the ball. Oh, no, we don't need to do that. I'll just put it in here, and it doesn't need to be dried. Now, she had heard the last part of my commending him for listening to a woman and seeking advice. And when she got that response from him, no, we don't need to do that, you could just see her, this mini deflation, just like, been there, done that lots of times. Community is something that we all sort of aspire to, but it's much harder to put together than it seems like it should. If you talk to a lot of people in our current culture, you'll hear things from both non-Christians and some Christians of, well, I know I need Jesus, but I really don't need church. And if you follow that up, you say, well, don't you want to go to hear a good message? You might hear something like, I can sit at home and Google some of the most well-known preachers in the world. Don't you want to go and hear some great music? I can go to Starbucks, put some earbuds in my ear, and hear a Hillsong concert. 5 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour. Don't you want to go and help serve? Oh, I serve. I do Habitat for Humanity once a year. We help build houses. What about the people? Oh, I got lots of friends. I don't need to go to church. In our particular country today, we have floating through the culture what philosophers call individualism. In the past, in human history, people thought of themselves and their identity within the bounds of community, who you were in relation to the people around you. But in our particular culture right now here in America, generally speaking, it has flipped. We now think about ourselves as individuals, and we think about our own identity and our desires and our feelings as the most important thing. Now, we may not say that because that sounds arrogant, and we don't want to sound arrogant. But generally speaking, that's where that just floats in the culture like that's a value. Sometimes you may see it as something like this. Hey, is there? Can I get this for you? Oh, no, I'm good. Where what you have to offer, the kind of help you have to offer, would actually be of help to this person. It's patently obvious that it would be, but there's some kind of resistance to receiving help. It's almost like there's this sense in the air of, I don't need your help. And then beyond that, sometimes it may be felt in relationship of, I don't need you. That's not mean. It's just that individualism is so strong. I don't need people. I know what to do. I don't need to be around people. I don't want to be involved in community because I don't want to be hassled. I don't want to be involved in community because sometimes it involves drama. I don't want to be involved in the community because somebody might ask me to do something or to call upon my time with which I am unwilling to give to. Now we're getting closer to, why is community so hard to put together? Now, when I say community, I don't just mean church. I mean a marriage, a family, your extended relatives. Why is community such a hard thing to do? There's a book written called Habits of the Heart, and the author's name is Robert Bellah. And he describes two kinds of individualism that flies through just wafts through our culture today. The first he calls utilitarian individualism. Now, this is the one that's most familiar to all of us older than about 30. In our country, we make a hero out of the underdog that overcomes great odds and rises to success. The people that pull themselves up by their bootstraps and make something of themselves. The strong and self-sufficient. Now, there's nothing wrong with self-sufficiency. Nothing wrong at all. But these are the people that are driven to make a statement about who they are through their work, through their community, through their effort. They make a statement to the world. They make a statement to themselves. Their identity is based on a certain individualism. Now, they may not like the institutions of church, government, neighborhood, the police, all that kind of stuff. But these folks will go along with how things run generally for the sake of getting to that place where they feel good about themselves, they look good to those around, they feel their sense of fulfillment. That's utilitarian, as he describes it, utilitarian individualism. Now, the second kind is newer on our American horizon. He calls it expressive individualism. And on this one, the sense is almost the opposite. Is this person is driven to find some way to express their individualism, to make a statement about who they are. This is who I am. The self that is me should be celebrated. I'm celebrating myself, and I expect you to celebrate me as well. Now, this has hundreds of different expressions in our particular culture. But the driver is the same. My identity, my sense of self is largely found in me. In me. Individualism at its heart is simply, I am the center of my world. Now again, we're not going to say that because that sounds arrogant. We don't want to admit that. But if you hear your heart, oftentimes in conversations with people, listen to the echoes of what's going on in there. Who or what is really most important? Now, we are going to do, today is a brand new series called The Heart Attitudes. We haven't done this in a few years. But what is it that makes for community? How does that happen? Both in a church, out in the community, at work, your community, at work, in your home? What keeps us from having community? What gets in the way? Why do we not experience it? There are 7 things we're going to look at that are like building blocks of community or expressions of community. And these are things that for us in our church, this is who we aspire to be. This is who we aspire our community to look like, to feel like, in how we relate to one another, both collectively and in conversations. Out on the patio, the foyer, in here afterwards, on the internet. What does community look like? Well, there are 3 relational enemies we're going to look at. There are 2 relational friends, and there's 1 relational attitude that we can find in the core passage today, Philippians 2, 3 through 5. Have nothing to do with selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility count others better than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to your own interests, but also to the interests of others. Have this mind among you, which is in Christ. And then we'll look at what that means. 3 enemies, 2 friends, and 1 attitude. Our first relational enemy is, I need to feel good. I need to feel good. Now, in your handout, it says I want to feel good. And I really wish I had changed this before we printed it. Because there's nothing wrong with wanting to feel good. The problem is when what's driving us is I need to feel good now. Either alone or particularly in conversation with somebody else. Do nothing from selfishness or conceit, is what he says. Now, when we think of selfishness, probably if you're like me, you think about that vain person at work that everybody hates and as we like to say, thinks only about himself or herself. Okay, that falls under the umbrella of selfishness. But from the Bible's point of view, selfishness simply means I think about me just a wee bit more than I think about you. In a conversation, this happens all the time. Without knowing it, I'm relating with my importance just a little bit ahead of yours. It doesn't look like selfishness. Nobody could ever accuse you of being selfish. But you see this played out over many years in a marriage, or many years together at work, or many years as neighbors, where we just sort of intuitively can smell the air of self. We can smell the smoke. We know what's really going on here. It may sound like I'm thinking about you, but what's really going on is there's something here that's just a wee bit more important than what the other person is thinking about. And then he says selfish ambition. Now, he's not talking about ambition in general, the ambition to do well at work, the ambition to do well financially. He's not talking about that at all. Ambition in the Bible is sort of like money. You can have good money and you can have bad. You can earn good money, you can earn bad money. You can spend good money, you can spend bad money. Ambition is a lot like this. He's denouncing selfish ambition. And what does he mean here? It's just that urge in the heart to push me just a little bit in front of you. Ambition is nothing more here than that urge that quietly drives us as we relate to other people. Paul's telling us a life that peaks self into the first chair naturally leads to futility and emptiness. He's going to talk about vain conceit in just a moment, and the idea of vain is empty, fruitless. It's the same word that Solomon uses in the book of Ecclesiastes. When I do this, when I pursue self, it's just a wee bit more important than my wife or each of my kids or my friends, or brothers and sisters in Christ, people at a picnic, then I am slowly leading myself down an empty road. It may not feel empty right now, but over time, I'm going to sense that in my life. Now, it's hard for us to see this kind of selfishness, partly because we don't want to see that in ourselves. We don't want to admit that's true, However, in Psalm 36, the writer says, for in his own eyes he flatters himself too much to detect or to hate his sin. Our first relational enemy is, I need to feel good. Our second is, I need to look good. And again, in your handout, it's going to say, I want to look good. Scratch that out. There's nothing wrong with wanting to look good. That's okay. When it's, I need to look good, that's when we get in trouble. Second part of this verse says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Again, vain means empty or fruitless. And conceit is the word that comes from, the root word comes from the word glory. And actually, in the English, it's translated vain conceit, but in the Greek, it's one word. It's a compound word. Kino means vain, and glotza means glory. Vain conceit, vain glory. I am seeking something for me that's going to lead me to emptiness. Now, there's nothing wrong with wanting to be respected. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be seen as a good mother or as a competent businessman. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be seen as a good athlete or to be respected in your community. There's nothing wrong with wanting those things. But we make a big mistake when in our heart, sometimes even unbeknownst to us, we twist a good desire and we say, this is what I need. This is what I need for life. This is what I need to feel good about me. This revolves my sense of identity. This is who I am. We get in trouble on that because you may have noticed that people and the world are not all that cognizant of what you want. You say, well, how do I know when selfishness is a problem? The easiest way I know that is, what do I get angry about? Virtually every time I find myself getting frustrated, irritated, starting to get angry about something, I think self is lurking somewhere around here in the bushes. You know, Lord, what is it I think I need at this moment to make my life valuable or to feel good about myself or to look good? The snake is hissing somewhere in the weeds of Seth, around Seth. The first relational enemy, I want to feel good. The second one, I want to look good. And the third relational enemy is simply, first me, then you. First me, then you. First me, then you. You say, I don't know if I've ever done that or not. Well, think about the last time you had a conflict or a misunderstanding. Have you uttered these words? If you would just first listen to me and what happened to me, then we wouldn't have this conflict. Now, doesn't that make perfect sense to you when you're in the midst of that? Of course that's how this should happen. That's how it resolves. But the first me, then you, is irritating to the person you're talking about and likely makes them even more stubborn than they have just been. It is a relational enemy, though it makes sense to us. It is slowly like poking holes in a bottle and watching the water that's in there slowly drip, drip, drip over a long period of time. First me, then you. One of the episodes that I like when I think about this is at least 7 times Jesus made known to his disciples that there was coming a day when he's going to go to Jerusalem. He's going to be arrested. He's going to be condemned to die. He's going to be flogged, scourged. He's going to be crucified, and he's on the 3rd day resurrected. Now, he tells them at least 7 different occasions that that's going to happen. That is clear can be. And yet, those words go in one ear and out the other of those 12 men. There is no recognition. It makes absolutely no sense to them. Now, on one of those occasions, James and John, who were sort of, along with Peter, just above the other 9, it seems like, after one of these occasions where he tells these guys, I'm going to Jerusalem. I'm going to be arrested. I'm going to be condemned to die. I'm going to be scourged. I'm going to be crucified and then resurrected. Immediately, two of them, James and John, say to him, hey, when you come in your kingdom, can one of us sit on your right hand and one of us sit on the left hand? You think, what kind of brazen request? How insensitive can these guys be to ask a request on the heels of what he just said to them? And yet, you stop and think, that request made sense to them. Why? First me, then you. First me, then you. Jesus says, man, you guys are moving in the wrong direction. Verse 25, Jesus called them together and said, you know what, the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them. First me, then you. And their high officials exercise authority over them. First me, then you. Not so with you. It said, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. Whoever wants to be first among you must become your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. In so many of our conversations, I am tempted to grasp the bucket of water that I think that what my soul needs, or to feel good about myself, to look good, to first me, bucket of water. And I just sort of expect that makes complete sense to me. Grasping the bucket of water. The thing that is so unintuitive to us is to instead grasp the pitcher. And in a conversation, in a brainstorm session, in trying to make a decision, in trying to work through a conflict, in trying just to figure out where we're going to go for lunch after church, or what are we going to do with our budget, to first grasp the pitcher. These are relational enemies, he says. I need to feel good. I need to look good. And first me, then you. Now, there are two relational friends in our passage here that come from our passage. And before we look into these, I'm reminded of a story. I love the story of this. It's an old allegory. It's been around for a long time. It's called the allegory of the long spoons. And the first image is an image of hell. And there's a long banquet table with maybe a dozen people around this. And there is a banquet on the banquet table, ready to be eaten. But then when you look at the people who are around the banquet, they're virtually skeletons. There's food there, but they're starving to death. As you widen back from the picture, each one of them has a spoon, a wooden spoon. And it's a long wooden spoon. And each of them are grasping for the food that's in front of them. And because the spoon is so long, they cannot reach the food to their mouth. But they keep grasping and grasping. And the more that they're empty, the hungrier that their stomach is and their soul is, the more frantic they become to fill themselves first. And they're slowly dying. But all of them see it's the other person's fault. Couldn't be me. The second image is an image of heaven. And there's the banquet, same banquet table, and 12 people around there. And yet what's going on there is they all look like they're well fed. And instead of frantically competing with one another and angry with one another, yelling at one another, there's peace and harmony going on. They enjoy being together. And what's the difference? Because those people, they look at that long spoon in their hand, and the first thing that comes to their mind is not the bucket. It's the pitcher. Let's say get some food on there, and they're looking for who needs some food. Two different pictures images of community. Well, Paul says we have two relational friends. The first one is humility. Humility. And what he says is, so interesting, he says we need a new assessment of ourselves and a new assessment of the people around us. Humility. Do nothing out of selfish ambition, but in humility consider others better than yourselves. Now, humility is one of those strange virtues because everybody admires the virtue of humility. It's just that very few want to be humble, especially when you consider what may need to be involved in order to get there as a humble person. I mean, I think as Christians, Lord, give me humility. We only pray that once in our lifetime. Humility, do nothing out of selfishness or conceit. Humility, consider others better than yourself. But what does humility look like? Oh, we have these strange things that we think about humility. Humility means, as Christians, I kind of have to walk around mopey because I know I'm really not the Christian I should be, as we talk to ourselves. I need to walk around somewhat discouraged a little bit because I can't really expect that God is going to bless me after the week I've had or the choices I've made. Do I need to walk around just kind of that air of failure? Maybe one day I'll get it together as a Christian. None of those things have anything to do with humility. Those things all have one thing in common: wounded pride. That is not humility. Humility is not thinking less about yourself. Humility is thinking about yourself less often. Again, think about in the most narrow application, a conversation. A conversation. Humility. Do nothing out of selfishness, ambition, or vain conceit, in humility. And here he says we need a new assessment. Consider others better than yourself. Now, that doesn't mean that it feels that way, it looks like that way. You're not trying to play mind games with yourself. It's just that somebody else becomes more important in that moment than you. He's not talking about some big generic thing. He's talking about the conversation you're going to have as soon as we're done, or over coffee, or driving home with your spouse or your kids. Consider. What does humility mean? Humility means that maybe I don't have to be as noticed as I thought I should be, or as coddled as I thought I should be, or as appreciated as I thought I should be, or recognized like I thought I should be, important or valued. Those all things relate to pride. Humility says, there's nothing wrong with those things. I'd like those things to happen, but I don't need them to happen for my sense of well-being or identity. Our sense of well-being and identity comes from some of the songs we sang this morning. I am a child of God. That trumps everything else. Relational friend number one, humility. Relational friend number two, other-centeredness. And here the idea is I need a new aim. My aim tends to be curled in on myself. That comes naturally to us in our fallen nature. Each of you should look not only to your own interests, but also to the interests of others. Our attitude comes from an assessment of ourself and the person or people we're talking about, and our aim. Our attitude is largely combined from those two things. The assessment with which we see ourselves and see others, and then based on the assessment we come up with, it drives our aim. No, we don't think about this. It just happens. We're people. This is how we operate. And here Paul says, you need a new aim. And then Paul, a few verses later, talks about Timothy, and that he wants to send Timothy to the Philippian church. Why would he want to send Timothy? This is just so outstanding. I hope in the Lord Jesus to send Timothy to you soon, that I also may be cheered when I receive news about you. I have no one else like him who takes a genuine interest in your welfare. No one. Nobody on his mission team. Nobody on the young pastors he's training to lead churches and do church starting. Can't think of one. Everyone looks out for his own interests, not those of Jesus Christ. Our three relational enemies. I need to feel good. I need to look good. And first me, then you. And our two relational friends, humility and other-centeredness. And then he finishes this little bitty passage with one attitude. It has to do with Jesus Christ, the mindset of Christ. One of the guys in our church who's still with us a number of years ago came up to me after church one day and he said, "Hey, Pastor Seth, do we have a cosmetic surgeon in the church?" I'd never been asked that question before, and I said, "No, I don't think we do." And then I was curious, I said, "Well, why do you ask?" He said, "Man, I've got a big tattoo on my butt." And I started laughing, and he said, "It says, center of the world, the center of the world." I love that story. Philippians 2 says, have the mind that was in Christ Jesus, who, being in the very nature of God, did not consider, which is the same word used just a little bit before, consider others better than yourselves. What he's saying is, Jesus did that. What did he consider? He could have stayed in heaven, where he's loved 24/7, as we count it, from eternity past. And he decided that he was going to leave that, where he was considered equal among the Father, Son, and Spirit, and come down to this place. And you know how we treated him. He didn't hang on to that. He didn't consider that as important, as something he needed. Equality with God, something to be grasped. Didn't do that. Made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant. And here, not just a servant by washing the disciples' feet, but servant, what does it mean to serve somebody else in a conversation? For some of our folks, I hope you will ponder that this week. What does it mean to serve somebody else in a conversation? Being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself, relational friend number one, and became obedient to death for the sake of others, relational friend number two. Well, I want to close our message today with one of my favorite video clips from a movie. It's Les Miserables, the Liam Neeson version. And if you're not familiar with the story, let me just tell you the clip you're going to watch. Liam Neeson, named Jean Valjean, had been in a prison for 19 years, and he's finally out on parole, but he has nowhere to go. Nobody's going to hire him. Doesn't know what he's going to do for food. He goes to the bishop's house in a particular village, and the bishop lets him come in, and he has dinner, and he offers him a place to stay that night. And in the middle of the night, the old Jean Valjean rises up within him. He sees his desperate situation, and he sneaks back into the main room and steals a bunch of silver flatware, which was worth a lot of money. But the bishop hears him in the middle of the night. The bishop hears something going on, and he comes out in his white robe, this old man, and Jean Valjean clocks him and knocks him out, and then runs out into the night with his bag of silverware. The next day, the sergeant and two of the soldiers have discovered him, and where did you get the silver? And he says to them, the bishop gave it to me. And they know it's a big crock. And so they haul him back to the bishop's house. And you will watch in visual form this message in about 3 minutes. Let's go.